going to be around for a little while, but also if you have questions obviously about EV or even want to take a walk back down that history lane, then actually we have the EV history, which is right in the Skywalk on your way to the North Hall. And also in the North Hall, we have our EV Solution Center. So make sure if you have questions about EV or even kind of want to know a little bit more about what was discussed, those are two great resources that you're able to take advantage of. We're going to continue our morning here, and we're going to get into a little bit of economic forecast. All right, so coming up next, we have our NADA economic forecast. And for that, I'd like to have Patrick Manzini join me here. He is our NADA chief economist. Patrick, good morning. How are you? All right, the stage is yours. Enjoy. Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope you're having a great show so far. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we saw in the average dealership last year, some expectations for the light vehicle market going forward, and then cover some key macro topics out there and what we expect that's going to happen in the future with them as well. So let's dive right in with the discussion of what happened in the average dealership last year. We saw record sales in the average dealership, first time over $70 million, coming in at $71 million, a significant increase compared to the COVID impacted 2020 year. We saw sales up across all major dealership departments. New, used, and fixed operations all saw significant gains. In the new and used department, throughput increased for both new and used vehicles. And then when we got to fixed operations, we saw a lot of consumers in there wanting to keep their vehicles on the road because it's still tough to get your hands on a vehicle right now. That was also a key channel for many of our dealer members to acquire inventory. We saw a lot of creative ways that dealers worked to acquire that inventory to sell over the past couple years. And that service channel was certainly a good one. In many cases, consumers were able to get a significant value for their trade and move into a new vehicle, in some cases without any change in monthly payment. Now, when we sum up sales across all the dealerships in the country, around 16,600 or so of them, light vehicle dealerships that is, we saw sales hit another new record here, $1.18 trillion in total dealership sales dollars across the whole country. Now, just for context, that represents about 18% of all retail sales in the country. And of course, that means that franchise dealers are a significant contributor to the tax coffers across all of the country. Franchise dealership employment. Now, we did see employment fall fairly dramatically, of course, at the start of the pandemic, but the PPP loans came through, and I think nearly all of our dealer members took advantage of that great federal government program and were able to keep most of their staff. We have seen some reductions. Not everybody has come back. I think average headcount was around 69 or 70 pre-COVID, and right now it's 63, 64. So those few jobs that haven't come back yet, I think will come back once we see sales rates more regularly close to 17 million units. I think there were a lot of efficiencies gained from many of these dealerships, and so they have learned quickly how to do more with less. But again, I do expect we'll see this probably pick up as the inventory situation works its way through and we have more cars to sell. Now, transaction prices. I think unless you were sleeping under a rock the last year, you know that vehicle pricing has gone up fairly significantly. On the new vehicle side, tight inventory, pushed some prices up a little bit. But a few of the driving factors of the increasing new vehicle transaction prices have been kind of consumer shifts. We're seeing more and more consumers picking out those light truck vehicles, and by light trucks, I'm referring to crossovers, pickups, SUVs, and vans to a lesser extent. But certainly that has been a big factor in why prices have risen. We also saw some unique OEM decisions last year. Because of the tight chip supplies, OEMs have prioritized production of higher trimmed vehicles. And partially that's also from consumers demanding those higher trimmed vehicles, but that richer mix also contributed to those price increases. Finally, we saw significant reductions in OEM incentive spending throughout the year. And that incentive spending is at record low levels right now. But I do expect we're going to see that return more to normal again with the inventory situation. Now, with used vehicle pricing, If you couldn't find that new vehicle, where do you turn? You turn to the used market. So we also saw OEMs prioritizing delivery of vehicles to retail customers over fleet customers. So there were some fleet businesses participating in that used vehicle market. And there were just, more people there bidding up prices. In fact, it wasn't uncommon, and even today it's probably not uncommon for many of our dealer members to go to auction and pay close to the original MSRP for 2 to 3 year old vehicles. So that's just the nature of the market. There's a lot of demand out there for vehicles, and of course retail prices rose, pretty much in line with those wholesale values. Now, I mentioned that market shift. You can see here it's really just a dramatic shift in consumer preferences for the vehicles that they want to buy. A little over 10 years ago, we were pretty much a 50-50 car, truck, light truck marketplace. Well, now, last year was just over 3 out of every 4 vehicles sold was a light truck, and now it's close to 80% through the first 2 months of the year. I think by the end of the year, we'll probably have an 80-20 split, 80% light truck, 20% car share. You can expect that those car segments are going to continue to lose share throughout the year. There were a few unique months last year where car segments picked up share, but I think it was really just because consumers were looking for anything with 4 wheels that they could get their hands on in that tight inventory environment. I don't really think that these higher gas prices we're seeing are going to cause customers to shift away from these vehicles they want, those 3-row SUVs, the crossovers, et cetera, because unlike the last time we saw gas prices this high, there are a lot more alternative fuel powertrains available in these popular segments. So maybe you don't choose the big V6 anymore, maybe you pick the hybrid, the plug-in hybrid, or the battery electric vehicle in many cases that will be available later this year. And speaking of powertrain shares shifting, we're seeing here, this is through the first 2 months of the year compared to the first 2 months of last year. We're seeing continued growth in these alternative fuel powertrains each month. So hybrids picking up share, plug-in hybrids picking up share. Last year, EVs accounted for 2.9% of all vehicles sold, and this year, pure battery electric vehicles are already over 4%. So I expect by the end of this year, we're probably going to see battery electric vehicles claim about 5% or so, maybe 6%, depending on how quickly we can work our way through this chip shortage of total new vehicle sales. It really is just, there's so many new interesting battery electric vehicles coming online over the next 2 years, finally in those popular segments that customers want. So I really see no reason why we won't see continued growth in that segment. I also wanted to call out our franchise dealerships for their stellar year selling battery electric vehicles. All-time record for franchise dealerships selling battery electric vehicles, 135,000 units or so. They had just under a third of the market. And as I mentioned, with all of these new models coming online from our legacy OEMs, it's really only a matter of time before franchise dealers capture more and more of this battery electric vehicle market share. I expect continued growth there as well. Now, this chart is just certainly something. It's pretty commonplace now, but we did see incentive spending fall throughout the year, pretty much in line with inventory falling. So, we saw inventory bottom out at record low levels in September of 2021, the lowest it had been since 1985. And it could have been, even farther back, but that's how far back we could get the data, was 1985. So record low inventory. It's up a little bit, but we haven't seen a significant pickup there yet. We do expect that inventory levels are going to improve throughout the year. There are additional risks, of course, the war in Ukraine. This has been one of the big topics that I've been hearing from many people just in discussions at the NADA show. Ukraine has, for just to pick one, they apparently produce 70% of the world's neon, which is a key input to production for semiconductor manufacturing. They also have significant wiring harness production. So, I think in the short term, first, let's hope that this war in Ukraine ends quickly. And if it has to go on, maybe let's hope that the supply chain can absorb some of these other shifts and be produced elsewhere. So I do want to make one other comment on this chart. It's that, I've heard some people thinking that we might not see a return of incentives. I disagree with that. I expect that going forward, we're going to see incentives pick back up as inventory begins to build back up. I think it's going to begin to look a lot more like 2018 and 19. Maybe not those high levels immediately, but as inventory builds back up, we can expect the return of incentive spending. Now, used vehicle values. This is the J.D. Power Used Vehicle Value Index. Captures prices at wholesale auctions. I mean, really, we just saw record price increases throughout all of last year. And I think we haven't really seen the peak yet. Right now, we're entering tax return season, and that's going to stimulate a lot more demand from customers, as it typically does. You notice that little dip there. I mean, it's really only a couple percentage points down. But like I said, I think we're going to probably see the peak sometime in the next few months, and then we're going to begin to see a return of seasonality, a return of traditional patterns in used vehicle values throughout the year. I do want to be clear, though, that I do not expect to see a dramatic fall off in used vehicle values that comes abruptly. I think that used vehicle values are going to decrease close to the same rate that we see new vehicle inventories build back up. So, and I also want to make clear that I don't think we're going to go back to 2019 price levels either. I think we're going to have a new elevated floor for used vehicle values going forward. But I do think, everybody is worried. If you have to go out and buy this inventory, I'm sure you're worried about, losing your shirt on some of these cars. But I think, the next few months at least are still going to be very strong values. And even for the rest of the year, at least in historical terms, values should remain pretty high. Now let's talk average monthly payments. We've seen growth across all of kind of the major metrics we look at. And by that I mean growth in average monthly payments for new loans, used loans, and new leases. Now, I think we could have seen even more growth in the average monthly payment, but there were a few factors that helped. Because of such strong used vehicle values out there, consumers coming into the dealership with a trade-in, wow, I mean, they saw they just had so much more equity in their trade than they would have had otherwise. The most recent stat on this, February over February, 22 over 21, from J.D. Power, average consumer equity in trade was up 93%. So, that helps a lot with keeping that monthly payment growth down. Another thing that helped was the low interest rate environment. Now, you can see here where we were before COVID. We're about 140, 150 basis points lower for both new and used finance rates relative to where we were before this all started. It has been fairly consistent over the past year. I do expect, though, that we're going to begin to see rates rise. Of course, it's pretty much a given that the Federal Reserve Board of Governors is going to raise rates next week, probably 25 basis points. I'm expecting that we're going to see probably 4 or 5 rates. This chart just shows a 100 basis point increase, but 125 basis points throughout the year is certainly still in the cards. And when you see these rate increases, you can pretty much assume that auto finance rates are going to move pretty much in lockstep with that. So that would bring us back closer, very close to our pre-pandemic auto finance rates. It should pull up payments a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be a too dramatic of a shift. Now, let's talk fleet sales. As I mentioned briefly earlier, OEMs have prioritized delivery to their retail customers. And that certainly has shown up in our final fleet sales data. Fleet sales only accounted for about 13% of overall sales last year, down from the already impacted 2020 levels. I'm going to go ahead and say that I think this trend is going to continue for the rest of the year. Right now, I'm forecasting that fleet sales are going to account for about 13.5% or so of new vehicle sales this year, which brings us to about 2.1 million units. So, a little bit better if you're out there trying to buy fleet vehicles. You may have a little more opportunity to buy some of those, but it's not going to be anywhere near a full recovery back to pre-pandemic levels. And with that, discussion of fleet, that brings me to my new light vehicle sales forecast. For 2022, I'm forecasting light vehicle sales of 15.4 million units. That would be an increase of about 500,000 units from last year. I think that's a pretty solid increase. Now, certainly, there is room to revise this forecast up. I'm trying to be conservative right now because there are a lot of issues that could still come about as we continue to work our way through some of these supply chain bottlenecks. We could have some more impacts from COVID, and certainly the war in Ukraine is going to impact these supply chain issues as well. So 15.4 seems about right to me today. I do expect, though, and hope that we are through these supply chain issues by next year, which would bring us up to around 16.8 million for 23, and then by 24 we're back humming at 17 million units sold. Again, there is some risk here, but in general, I think it's going to be a really solid year this year, and if we can just get past these bottlenecks, we're going to have a really good year for sales. Now let's briefly kind of discuss some of the key macro trends out there. We saw real GDP grow last year by 5.7%, highest growth since, I believe, 1984. And this growth was really supported by a lot of federal spending. Consumers had money, they were out there spending in the economy, and we got this really robust economic growth, just truly stellar year. Now this year, we do expect that growth is going to fall back a little bit. We're going to see interest rates rise. We're going to see student loan payments resume. Inflation's out there, it's scaring consumers. Maybe they hold off on some of those purchases or pull back their spending a bit. And there's a myriad of factors here, but those are just some of them. I expect real GDP growth is still going to be high relative to our, our long-term average, a little between 2 and 2.5%. I'm forecasting real GDP growth for this year at around 3.5% to 4%, somewhere in that range. Again, there are risks here. The duration of the war in Ukraine, supply chain bottlenecks could pull this down further. But right now, 3.5% seems about right. Then in 23, we return to our our long-term kind of trend growth rate of between 2 and 2.5%. So still a pretty solid year this year. Now let's talk consumer sentiment. Consumer sentiment out there is at the lowest it's been since 2011. Now it's pretty dramatic shift, and what's going on when you read these consumers' comments in these surveys is, they're seeing price increases everywhere. We're still dealing with the everything shortage. I love that term for this. And so prices are up for energy, housing, food, vehicles, you name it. And so they are concerned that their standard of living is being decreased. And when I frame it like that, they're concerned that their wage gains are going to be eroded by inflation. And that is a very valid concern. And this is despite really solid wage gains that we've seen throughout the year. So I think one of the biggest things we can do, and hope that raising interest rates will calm some of this inflation, is for sentiment to recover and consumers to have more confidence to go back out there and spend and do stuff like that. Now I mentioned pricing. Here's the Consumer Price Index. The print that came out Thursday, highest inflation since 1982, highest year-over-year inflation, 7.9%. On average for all of last year, we saw prices rise by 4.7%. It is really tough. If you back out food and energy to get to the so-called core inflation rate, it's 6.4%. So it's a little better, but really it's not great. And I do think that the Fed is going to try all they can by raising rates to tame this inflation. But I think for the next few months, and keep in mind that the big increases in energy prices are not going to be factored into this February number. So it's likely next month we could see even higher inflation print. But I do expect that by the end of the year, again, this all depends on working through these supply chain bottlenecks, that we're going to see consumer prices come back down to where we're seeing year-over-year increases each month in the high 3% to 4% range. Now, of course, I mentioned gasoline prices. This comes from the U.S. Energy Information Administration's outlook. This was published earlier this week. So they've already revised their forecast for fuel prices over $4 throughout most of the summer. Again, it's not like, I wish this was possible, but we can't just snap our fingers and resume producing oil to fill up some of these shortfalls that we're seeing out there. It's going to take a little bit of time for some of these U.S. producers to get these rigs back online. I mean, if you look back to what happened in 2020 when fuel prices tanked, a lot of these producers went out of business, or many of them had to lay off their staff. So I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are hesitant. Are they going to get burned again? So, I think the capacity is going to come back online, and eventually we're going to see these fuel prices recede back into the higher $3 range. But for the short term, we're going to just have to deal with these higher fuel prices. Now, I think one of the best stories out there with regard to this economic recovery is the labor market recovery. Right now, as of the end of February, we are 2.1 million jobs below February 2020. And I mean, what a remarkable employment recovery. I can't stress this enough that if you just think about to the last Great Recession, or the last recession from '08, it took us over 6 years to get back all the jobs that were lost during that recession. This was a much deeper recession, and we're on track for these jobs to be back before the end of the year. I think it's going to happen within the next few months, where we have all these jobs back, and it's just a remarkable recovery. Certainly a lot of those federal stimulus programs have helped this. I guess the other side of that coin is that with all that stimulus money, we're now dealing with higher inflation. We're never going to be able to know what the other alternative would have looked like, but I'm happy that most people are able to go back to work. And firms are really out there trying to hire people. You can see here that as of the end of December, there are 1.7 job openings for every unemployed person out there. Truly a workers' market right now. I remember pre-COVID, it was a workers' market then, but we didn't see anything like 1.7 job openings for every unemployed person. We're seeing, people are talking about this great resignation. People don't want to work. I think it's more, I would like to call this the great reassessment. Workers have had a taste of a different life during COVID. Maybe many of them want a different job that allows them more time with their family, or many of them are out there looking for higher wages. And certainly we're seeing that in some of this hiring data. We're seeing, this comes from the what is called the BLS JOLT survey, and they also track hires and quits, and we are seeing hires outpacing quits in all major sectors. And what that means is most people who are quitting their jobs are doing so to leave for a better opportunity. So it's going to be tough. We're going to need to get more people back into the labor force. There are still, even this far into COVID, there's still people out there who are caring for family members or children. And so the best thing we can hope for is that we can put the pandemic behind us, we can deal with some of these supply chain issues, and we can get more and more people back to work. I think it'll be great. So, just to sum up, I think it's going to be another really great year for auto dealers out there. I think it's, we're going to have a lot of challenges in the broader macroeconomy here in the U.S. though. But in general, I think we're going to see a year of solid growth, solid employment gains, and really good vehicle sales. Now let's just hope that these chip shortage woes are behind us here pretty soon. And with that concludes my presentation. I don't know if anybody out there has any questions, but if you do, I'm happy to take them. All right. Well, thank you very much for being here, and I hope you all have a great rest of your show.
All right, once again, great job. Thank you, Patrick. Some insightful information there. Obviously, coming out of this post-pandemic kind of scenario, there are a lot of things that are still yet to be foreseen of where we're going to go.